All right then. So we're ready for our second class on Tchiyat HaMetim, and the next dimension of the afterlife. And understanding the Jewish belief of what happens to the soul, what happens to us, and what happens to the world in a time that we hope and pray for. Tonight's class is dedicated by David and Nurit Rosenblatt, as you see here. David is who you see on the Zoom, or you don't really see, just a little bit on the side. And Danny was Nurit's brother who passed away tragically last year. And we dedicate this class to his neshama, to the soul of Daniel, the son of Chaim. So the story is told, and I've told it before, so if you don't remember it, you're 1 point down on your quiz. But the story is told that the scientists get together and they tell God, okay, you've done a great job till now, but we finally caught up to you. We don't need your help anymore. We know how to cure all the diseases. We know what's going on. We know what needs to be done. We can even, form our own artificial intelligence, our own people. We can clone them. We can develop them. We've got it. Don't worry about it. You can retire. So God says, okay, that sounds interesting. Retirement, it's been many years. Maybe that's a good idea. But before I just leave everything in your hands, I'm going to just make sure that you guys know what you're doing. So let me see that human that you're going to make. Let me see your cloning or your developing of a human. And the scientists say, sure. And they make up to meet at the Central Park the next morning for an experiment. Sure, the next morning comes and the media is there and everybody's ready. And the team of scientists steps forth and they start to scoop up the earth. And they say, God created the first man out of the earth. We're going to do the same. And as they bend down and they start to scoop up the earth or try to shape something, a voice comes out from heaven. Hey, go get your own earth. But all jokes aside, seriously speaking, is there a scientific basis for Tchiyat HaMetim, for resurrection of the dead? Can it make sense? Should it make sense? Now, I know that question of should it make sense is a little strange, but as we proceed, you'll see what I mean. There is, of course, because Jews like to explore and argue and come up with all kinds of ideas, there is, of course, discussion about a possible scientific basis for this or scientific process and these ideas. And we'll just very briefly touch on some of it using, as usual, the video. So we'll switch our share here. No, that's not going to work. We'll do it this way.
On July 5th, 1996, Scottish scientist Ian Wilmot received the news he had been waiting for. Lamb number 6LL3 had been born.
First of all, I was immensely relieved that she was alive and apparently normal. There was a slight feeling of sort of awe, if you like, at the potential impact.
Wilmot and his team at the Roslin Institute outside of Edinburgh had spent several years trying to do what no one had before, to successfully make a clone of an adult mammal. Embryologist Bill Ritchie had lifted a single mammary cell from a 6-year-old ewe and fused it to a second sheep's unfertilized egg, which had been stripped of its DNA.
That's the method. The actual nuts and bolts of doing it is a little bit more complicated than that.
In fact, Ritchie had repeated the same delicate procedure over 400 times, and only one surviving embryo, number 6LL3, was carried to term by a surrogate mother.
A lot of the cloned animals previously had died, born and then died.
But this particular lamb got onto its feet very quickly and started bleating and looking to get its first feed of milk from its mother.
After the delivery, it was John Bracken's wisecrack that christened little 6LL3 with the name forever etched in the annals of scientific achievement.
I turned to my colleague and said, the lamb is being created from mammary cells, and basically I thought it would be a good idea to call her Dolly after Dolly Parton. I don't think I need to explain any more than that.
The few at Roslin who knew what made Dolly so special were sworn to secrecy.
We knew it was going to be a big story. We were going to get a lot of media scrutiny, and the top journals will not publish papers about things which have already been publicized.
They managed to keep Dolly under wraps from July until February. Then, just days before the news was set to be released,
somewhere or other, there was a leak. And because it was published in a Sunday paper, the thing blew.
It's a very long time since
Let's see if we get the volume to go up.
science story on Sunday made such waves on Monday.
The news was that scientists in Scotland had successfully cloned a sheep in a laboratory.
An exact copy made by a combination of genetics, biology, and technology.
I think you would say all hell had broken loose. It was just bedlam.
A brave new world has arrived with the debut of Dolly, a 7-month-old lamb.
What has caused such a shudder in the worldwide scientific community is that so many scientists doubted it could ever be done.
a frog had been cloned in the 1960s, but mammals were seen as too complex.
It was a seminal watershed event, and no one saw it coming. And people said, this is a Rubicon that we've crossed. Do we really know where we are?
Which brings us to the fundamental question, should we be applauding a mind-boggling scientific breakthrough or be nervous about where it might lead us?
Picture a world where hunger has been wiped out by our ability to clone the best cattle in great number, but where war threatens because some future Hitler decided to make multiple copies of himself.
What sensationalized it was that people began to say, well, could we do this with humans? And people tended to assume that this would happen.
Cloning a human being is closer than almost anyone had even imagined.
Now it seems that one day scientists could take a single cell from a more sophisticated creature, say like me, pull out my DNA, stick it in a new cell, plant the cell in a womb, and 9 months later, out would come a genetic copy of me, a clone.
The tantalizing prospect of cloning human beings soon overshadowed the true scientific promise of Dolly.
All right, so we've got our point from here, and I seem to recall we had similar sound issues in the past, and we were also on Zoom, but hopefully we'll get it down pat. Meanwhile, that's the old version. When they thought that cloning sheep will lead to cloning humans, and maybe that's a idea behind resurrection of the dead, restoring the human from a previous DNA and etc. Well, let's just take this theory one step further in a more modern terms. Here we go.
Rabbi Crisp, a recent...
That is not working. Let us try to do it this way. Get the sound to come over. Make sure the sound goes properly. We will try one more time.
Rabbi Crisp, a recent article in a scientific journal proposed bringing a woolly mammoth back to life by taking its DNA and recreating somewhat similar to the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park back. So in some sense, is this the resurrection of the dead, Tchiyat HaMetim? Is this perhaps how Hashem will bring humans back to life when Mashiach comes?
I'm aware of that particular project, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the first of its kind. Already a number of years ago, petrified seeds were found near Masada in Israel of a plant species that's believed to have been extinct for 1,000 years. they were able to extract a reasonably good intact sample of their DNA and through an elaborate process boot them up into new living cells. And for the last 5 or odd years, those plants are now growing again. An even further example, they took a extinct lion that had been in a jar for the last 100 years or so in a university laboratory. We're also able to extract its DNA and to get an embryo going through gesthesis inside the womb of a mouse. I guess it would have been the mouse that roared if it could have carried it to full term. It could not, but it is the first example of an animal actually starting to grow biologically that had been extinct for a significant period of time.
What all this points to is the notion that in the messianic age, many of these things that historically would have been. That's not working. See what's happening here, and we'll get this going with God's help.
A recent article in a scientific journal proposed bringing a woolly mammoth back to life by taking its DNA and recreating it somewhat similar to the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. So in some sense, is this the resurrection of the dead? Is perhaps how Hashem will bring humans back to life when the Mashiach comes?
I'm aware of that particular project, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the first of its kind. Already a number of years ago, petrified seeds were found near Masada, Israel, plant species that's believed to have been extinct for 1,000 years. They were able to extract a reasonably good intact sample of their DNA and cells, and the last 5 or 1 years, those plants are now growing again. An even further example, they took a extinct lion that had been in a jar for the last 100 years or so in the university laboratory. We're also able to extract its DNA and to get an embryo going through gesthesis inside the womb of a mouse. I guess it would have been the mouse that roared. It could have carried it full term. It could not, but it is the first example of an animal actually starting to grow biologically that had been extinct for a significant period of time. And what all this points to is the notion that in the Messianic age, many of these things that historically would have been regarded as miraculous will become part of our expanded understanding of nature. That nature itself will be unified with God above nature. The two will become one. Hashem, who will mean to God as above nature is will become one and the same God as nature. God is identical to the laws of nature. God also transcends them. And so we will see that this is part of the fabric of the universe, that things come back. And this is just the beginning. It's going to get wild.
Thank you very much.
So the real miracle will be when we don't have technical trouble when we try to be on Zoom and live at the same time. But hopefully in the end, everybody was able to understand the idea. And the idea really being that perhaps, maybe, nobody knows for sure, The idea of resurrection of the dead has some scientific process that we just have to figure out. And if we would figure it out, it would start to make sense to us. How many of us think that this is the Jewish idea of resurrection of the dead?
I think it's opposite.
Okay, explain.
As we discussed before, the body is a vehicle, right? So we can create as many vehicles. It's just a transportation for the soul. So without the soul, what is it really? I don't know.
So you're saying if it would just be to create the body by some process, that wouldn't be the real life of the soul in the body.
You create a body, but you don't know which soul is born.
Okay, but let's put it in other words. When God is going to resurrect the dead with the soul, what he's doing, does that make sense or is that a miracle?
I mean,
In other words,
the whole creation of the world is a miracle.
Right, but every day plants grow. It's a miracle too in some sense, but there's a process that we understand of how that works. There's the predictable botanical process. God does that too, but we consider that normal, we consider that nature. Is that going to be the same for resurrection of the dead? Is this also a process that we can explain?
Well, we don't know what the process God is going to use exactly because I haven't seen anywhere where it's written about this, right? But the fact that we're able to do it already kind of gives you, if we're able to do it, we can only imagine what, we cannot even imagine what God can
Okay, so in other words, it would be able to have some kind of logical basis, although God is going to do it, of course, on his terms. Any other thoughts on that?
In my understanding, cloning and resurrection are two different things. The resurrection, that's when every soul will go into the resurrected body. It doesn't really matter how long the body died. How long ago the body died. So even though, it's technically possible for a human to take a small, substance or body and recreate it from the scratch, but it's got to be the same body with the same soul, and I highly doubt that even though humanity gonna have this ability, they're not gonna go back and resurrect every possible dead person.
So you're saying cloning or restoration of a DNA is just a totally different story than resurrection. You can make something operate, but you're not going to have the soul coming back to the body. Interesting. Okay, now let's borrow something that Leo mentioned, which is that we don't know the process that God is going to use. Let's find out.
Maybe he will use a similar process to create a vehicle, but then the soul has to go into that vehicle.
Right, but let's see what the Torah does tell us about the process God uses. And for that, we have to, as usual, skip around. So we're going to skip ahead to page 34. Page 34 is text 9. Page 34, Leo.
Hadrian made his memory erased once asked Rabbi Yeshua then Hanani, from what will God resurrect man in the future world? Rabbi Yehoshua replied, from the laws in the spine. Prove this to me, said Hadrian. The rabbi took the laws, a small bone of the spine, and immersed it in the water, but it was not soaked. He put it into the fire, but it was not consumed. He put it into the mill, but it could not be ground. He placed it upon an anvil and struck it with a hammer, but the anvil split and the hammer was broken.
So nothing they tried to do could destroy this loose bone. And as the rabbi tells Hadrian, the Roman emperor, as we call him, the Roman emperors whose memory should be erased, because he was the emperor who put down the Bar Kokhba revolt and massacred the Jewish people. The rabbi tells him, How will God resurrect the dead? From that little bone. What does that tell us? What does that suggest?
So it's like an indestructible piece of like human being that's not going to decay over time.
Right, exactly. And B, God is taking a little bit and expanding from the little bit, which sounds even closer in some ways to this idea of expanding out of one cell, expanding the DNA, cloning, whatever you might call it. God, the Talmud was actually telling us God will take the one surviving bone that will not be destroyed, that little bit, and there's some debate which bone is it. According to the Ari and the Kabbalah, right the bone at the head of the skull where we place the knot of the tefillin. Others believe it to be lower down the spine. I don't know if medically you can explain either way. But regardless, the Talmud's message is there's something there that God takes and recreates the full human body. Again, getting even more similar. And if you look at another text, which is not in the book, which is why I put it up here, the Talmud says in a number of places, the dew with which the dead are destined to be resurrected. God will use dew. In other words, God is going to expand this bone using moisture. The Talmud describes it as yeast making the bread rise, regrowing the human from that bone. Now, all of this may be correct. And all of this may point to an understanding of resurrection of the dead in some kind of genetic process, which I personally cannot claim to be an expert in. But what concerns us most is a very interesting and perhaps troubling law and mission. So here we have to go back to the beginning of the lesson, to text 1. Text 1 is page 22. Okay, page 22, text 1, to just explain what this is. This is part of a list, a blacklist, if you will, in the Mishnah, describing who is a kofar. A kofar would be a heretic in Jewish law. Who goes into this category? In other words, who is violating the Jewish belief system? We won't get into now why we want to list that and why we want to get technical about that, but the Talmud does do that and does list the attitudes or the beliefs which would be in contradiction and a violation of the Jewish principles of faith. One of them being right here in text 1, one who says there is no support for the concept of the resurrection of the dead in the Bible. Very interesting statement. The Talmud could have said one who does not believe in the resurrection of the dead. That's not what the Talmud says. I know some people believe in it, some people don't. But what the Talmud says, who is the trouble? Where's the trouble? The trouble is when you say that the Bible doesn't support it. Rashi, classic commentator, expands on that. That you have right here on the next page, page 23. Text 2, page 23. Daniel?
When he says there's no support for the concept of the resurrection of the dead in the Bible. The Mishnah speaks of one who denies the various scriptural allusions to the resurrection of the dead found later in the Talmud. Even if the denier admits that the dead will indeed rise and does not conceive that such prospect is alluded to in the Torah, they are considered kosher.
So here Rashi gives it to us on a silver platter. Somebody says, yeah, I believe this is going to happen, but I don't think the Torah ever said so. I have another reason for believing so. Rashi says that's not the point. Point is you subscribe to that because of the Torah's message. Now this, yes.
What is kofar?
Kofar is that term we had earlier in the Hebrew, which would mean a heretic, a denier of the Torah. So here's where it gets kind of strange. Why are we getting so picky? I mean, it's hard enough to get support as it is. Are you going to tell people, no, you're doing that the wrong way? Same thing, wrong reason. I know the Talmud sometimes will have debates And in other occasions, you'll have two rabbis with the same ruling, but the Talmud will say, Rabbi A disagrees with Rabbi B. They have the same ruling, but for a different reason. And the truth is that you can see that till today in the Supreme Court, where you might have concurring justices with a different explanation. And they'll write up a separate ruling for the same bottom line, for a different reasoning for the same point. And that's fine. And I get how legally that can matter. Because if your reasoning is different, then in the next scenario, it's going to apply differently, etc., etc. But why, when we talk about people signing up, people subscribing, people accepting the Jewish belief in the resurrection of the dead, why do we make this big deal or this exclusionary attitude where your belief is not good enough because you just say it's going to happen, maybe scientifically, maybe some other way. You didn't actually recognize that the Torah says so. Why is it so important? So to sum that up, as you see here, one must believe in the resurrection of the dead and believe that it's sourced directly from the Torah. Our question, why can't I believe in it for my own reasons? Why does that have to be such a big deal? A follow-up question to that is what you have right here. We talked about this last week as well as in the past. There are 13 principles of faith, at least according to Rambam Maimonides. Number 12, belief in the coming of Mashiach. Number 13, belief in the resurrection of the dead. Now, does anybody remember, when will the resurrection of the dead take place? After and really as part of the coming of the Mashiach. What differentiates it from the rest of the goodies we get at that time, that it gets its own unit? I mean, nobody said, number 14, belief in the rebuilding of the temple. Number 15, belief in the ingathering of the Jewish people. Number 16, belief in eradication of disease. All these things we talked about in the time of the coming of Mashiach. We don't list them. That's all number 12. Why is number 13 independent of that belief in resurrection of the dead? Why is it standing on its own 2 feet? Why is it its own principle, and perhaps somebody will take one and not the other? Why are we separating that? So it could be as simple as saying, it's so important, we're going to make sure you didn't miss it. Because maybe somebody says, I believe in the coming of Mashiach, but I have no idea what it's all about. There are plenty of people like that. I don't know the details. I don't know what's actually going to happen then. I'm in, we'll see later. And here we're telling you, no, number 13, you got to be actually aware of the specifics. Maybe. But we're going to discover more than that, and hopefully it helps answer the rest of our questions. Before we start to try to do that, any questions that any of you have so far? Or we all agree that these are questions to address? Okay, so in the beginning of section 2, which will come right after text 3, I don't have that page number up here. Beginning in section 2 of this class, right after text 3 on page 24, so I guess it's page 25, you have an exercise. Think back to 2 things in recent past that you really wanted. So much so that I cannot imagine, in the quotations, I cannot imagine not having that thing. So think about something in your life, it doesn't really have to be in recent past, something in your life, something in your environment, in you, that is so important to you, so critical that you say, I cannot imagine life without it. Think about 1 example, think about 2. Share it or don't. The most important thing is to identify. Now, is that supposed to be something material? Whatever it is, something that exists or you hope for in your life and in your world, and to the point where you say, it's not my new car, but it's something that I cannot live without. It's something that is so central, I don't see another way. Now, rate your desire for these 2 items on the following scale. I'm going to reword this. Wherever it says reasonable, we're going to say logical. Completely logical, somewhat logical, not entirely logical, nothing to do with logic. Does anybody want to volunteer? What did you identify as that critical thing? And is it logical or somewhere in between? Yes, Lisa. Okay, is it only logical? What was it?
Is it only logical? No.
Okay. Do you want to explain or let's it out? Your choice.
I guess it's logical and hopeful or desirous that you need a partner and you know, you could be in love with and have the rest of your life. It's logical because most people don't do it.
So when I say logical, I mean, is this desire or commitment to this particular goal because of a defined logical benefit that cannot be gotten elsewhere? No, see, that's why it's tricky. Obviously, there are logical benefits, but is there a benefit that even if I stripped away the logical benefits, you still say, too bad, I'm staying with this? So this is where we want to go, of course. In every person's life, hopefully, there's something, someone, perhaps more, that you say, life cannot be without. And as much as you explain why, that's not the true reason why. Because if it was, then in all honesty, in pure, cold honesty, nobody has to volunteer this. But in all honesty, there would probably be a replacement. If somebody would say, I can't imagine life without my child because he or she is so bright or so sweet or so wonderful or gives me a run for my money or whatever it is, that would be nice. But then you haven't researched everybody. There's going to be somebody who maybe has similar qualities. Maybe adopt that child, let your child go. Obviously, that's not on the cards. Why? Because the real reason you're saying, I cannot imagine not having that thing or person or noun, whatever it is not logical. So again, when we say it's not logical, people say, hey, aren't there so many wonderful benefits? Are you saying there are no tangible, logical reasons? No, of course there are. And hopefully, let's use the example of children again. Hopefully everybody has day-to-day nachas and joy with their children that they can say, yes, this is logical, but it doesn't start and end there. If it did, a lot of things would look different. The point is really that there's so much about life, and perhaps most of what matters in life that stops being reasonable. Not that it's not reasonable that we don't accept it as normal, but it's not premised on reason, on logic, and on analysis. It's not premised on the explanations that you can give. In fact, some of those things probably developed that way. They started off as an explanation you can give. You were interested in, attracted to, got involved with X, Y, or Z because of some tangible benefit, but you've crossed over that line. You've now reached a point where you want to be there, you want to do that, you want to be that way. And we consider that completely normal. But we also should stop to think about how much or how little of our life is about this. So, people go about the day-to-day life and experience or whatever. How much of the time, how much of the attention do they give to things they got to do because of something else and because of a reason, because of an explanation, because of a purpose, because of logic? And how much time or attention or self do they give to those things that actually matter? The answer varies, but it's also the same for almost everyone. Because most of what we do is technical, most of what we do even with the people that matter most, and even in the scenarios that matter most, is just because we need to, just because we have responsibility, just for certain superficial objectives. We get less of an opportunity to identify with our real selves, what really matters to us and what we're really trying to do. So let's see how the slides do this. With so deeply connected something, it does not require explanation. In fact, an explanation would detract from its true depth. You can give an explanation, but that's not what it's about. And we all know that. To understand this a little bit better, we use a Hasidic concept called, as you see here, and we'll go into this in a reading here, the outer heart and the inner heart. The outer heart is, as you see, explainable choices based on matters you ostensibly care about, and the inner heart is the deep choices that don't need to make sense. Let's go through this step by step. In Hasidic teaching, almost everywhere, you have an idea which is called superficial desire, chitzoniyut haratzon, we call it in Hebrew, and pnimius haratzon, the internal desire or the true desire. What's the difference between the two? The easiest example is why people go to work. Say, I want to go to work. Don't hold me up. Don't keep me in traffic. I want to go to work. Do you want to go to work? Well, it depends what you do. But for most people, even if they enjoy what they do, if they didn't have to be there that day, they wouldn't. So why do they want to go to work? They don't want to go to work, they have to go to work. The answer is that they want to go to work as a stepping stone for what they really want. What they really want is to support their family. What they really want is to advance to some greater goal, whatever it is, each in their own way. And they're going and doing this job, which they rather have a day off from, to get to what they really want. They don't, so if you really get down to it, you don't want to go to work. And you don't want to start the car. And you don't want to put gas in the car. You keep saying you want and you want to do that and you keep making the choice to do that. But all of that is by force in a sense because you have no other way to get to your true goal. So what you really want lies at the end of the road. All the rest of it is not what you want. It's superficial desires for a greater purpose. Fair enough. Let's raise that up a notch when we look at not such simple examples from life, but our relationship with God and the terms, the Hasidic terms of desire and passion that get used there. Text 4 is page 26. Page 26, text 4. This is in the Tanya from the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Shneir Zalman. There are two elements to the heart, namely to the soul's passion for God, an external one and an internal one. The external dimension is when the heart is impassioned at thinking of God's greatness. A passionate flame of love is ignited when one thinks deeply into such matters. The internal dimension is that core part of the heart, buried deep down, a feeling that is far beyond reason, a feeling deeper than any thought process can conjure. This deeper dimension exists in worldly matters as well. There are certain matters about which a person cares so deeply, matters upon which their entire life depends, that reach the deepest part of the heart. At times, such matters can compel a person to say or do completely irrational things. So you can have two stages which are somewhat related to the previous analogy in the passion that a Jew should be finding within him or herself for God. You can have it where it's logical, where it's developed by meditation. We're going to talk about that in the winter course, by the way. You have it where you learn, you recognize the greatness of God, the relationship the Jewish people have with God, the mission that the Torah is, and you feel energized and passionate about it. We call this Ahavat Hashem, love for God. We're trying to do this every day, in the prayer. But then you have a sense where it's actually just natural and inborn to the heart. People show up on Yom Kippur. People show up each at their own time and situation when they decide to have a connection, and they don't really know why. So why do they come? They don't know why. Who should know why? Nobody knows why, but they're still there because something inside them does know why. Something inside the individual says, this is what's important. This is what I'm going to do. Now, this is tricky because we're saying that that's the greater, more true, more complete, more deep desire for God, for connection, for what's right for the Torah. On the other hand, it exists in everybody equally. So everybody will show up on Yom Kippur because of an internal sense of conviction, while only the advanced will be the scholars to know and to feel that way or feel some sense of passion and desire throughout the year. But this is actually the greater, deeper, more meaningful, richer part of the Jewish heart of the soul. The part that doesn't need to be taught. The part that isn't explained. The part that just senses that this is what's right and I'm willing to even pay a price for it, as we know all too well, because it matters to me. And that's naturally found in every Jewish soul and every Jewish experience. So going through that, we have it in life, small steps, superficial choices, superficial desires that we want, but we don't really want, we're going somewhere else. And then we have the more advanced version where you say, yeah, I want this, I'm into this, I'm developing this, I'm committed to this, but it's all because of a reason. It's all because of an explanation, which ultimately means it's for some deeper purpose. But in a deeper sense, is what I actually want and what's actually natural to me. Why do you want chocolate or vanilla? The best choice is neither. But why are you choosing chocolate or vanilla? There isn't a reason why. That's what you want. It doesn't need to be explained, and everybody understands that it makes sense then, but it actually doesn't make sense. It's actually just what's inside of you that draws you there. Okay, fair enough. What does it mean then to experience, shall we call it, a state of the coming of Mashiach, a state of redemption, a state of freedom, a state of being elevated beyond the way we live life today? Based on all the above. I'll tell you, if we can live on that plane, if we can live and experience the part of ourselves that say, this is what I really want, this is what's really valuable, this is what doesn't need an explanation, this is what I may have 10 explanations for, but the explanations are not the whole story, then we can live a much freer, more real, and what we would call redeemed kind of life.
The question is, the inner heart almost sounds like an instinct.
In a sense, yeah.
So, are you saying that the choice that you just described should be instinctual?
Well, it isn't always going to be. But starting with the simple example, if we say what matters to me, and I don't want to live life without whether or not it makes sense as my family, how much of my life is invested in that? Or how much of my life do I get to experience that? Or am I 90% of the time just keeping up to keep that alive? To be free would be to say, I get to experience this all the time. I get to live with what matters most all the time. Going up a notch, that would mean when we talk about a desire for God or a desire for a connection, not only by choice, but feeling the quality of it where it is in the instinct. Let me explain this maybe a little bit more. In the Hasidic analogy, the Kabbalistic analogy of the outer choice, superficial choice, which is to go to work, to do business, to make some money because of some greater desire. So what the person really wants is to live, to survive, however the term will be. That doesn't need rational explanation, and rational explanation provided for it doesn't actually cover it. It's true and fine for itself, but it's not containing the full desire. I just want to live, whether or not you understand that, whether or not I understand that, it's normal for every human being. That super-rational desire creates or generates a logical desire, which says, well, if you want to live, go on a diet, you want to live, go to work, etc., whatever it is that you need to do to keep yourself where you need to be. All of those smaller logical choices, they're also desires. But those desires were generated by logic, by our thinking process, to serve the objective of a deeper, more purposeful desire. So at the end of the day, all I want to do is live, or live a more spiritual life, or put it in whichever words, and all of these little things are serving that purpose. But the sense, the feeling that I have, the experience that I have, is not the same in both places. When I'm in touch with my desire to live, with my true passion, there's an energy there that isn't found in the recreated desire to live of the little things that I do every day. So yeah, why do I go to work? Why do I go to the doctor? Why am I doing this procedure? Whatever it is, for the true desire that I want to live. But right now, I'm busy with this. This desire was spawned off of that one by an intellectual process and is restricted by it. That's the key word here. Anything that is logical is great, but it's also restricted by that logic. It's only worth as much as the logic can explain. You'll only invest in it as much as makes sense to, and that's good, as much as is needed. So you aren't experiencing the real passion, the real desire that you have at this time, even though everything is serving that purpose. I hope it's not getting too complicated.
For the Jew in reality, and for a real Jewish soul, especially somebody who was brought up in a religious family with all the values, there should be really only one desire. It's the connection with God. Because everything else, as we learn and know and understand now, thank God that we understand that some of us at least, that comes from God, right? So that means all your desires can be fulfilled by God. So you really need to only worry about connecting with Hashem, and then your job, your family, everything else is going to be taken care of pretty much by default, because from God can only come good things, and sometimes we can't even explain goodness in certain things because they seem awful to us, but pretty much, why even worry about your job or worry about anything when you need to worry about connecting with Hashem? Because once you lose that connection, your jobs, your houses, your cars, it just becomes completely irrelevant.
So it is correct, but there's a challenge there. In other words, there's a challenge of losing the forest for its trees. So we do all the little things for the purpose, but sometimes we forget about the greater purpose. It's a natural thing that people get caught up. They get caught up with the details. They forget about where the details are going, or at least it's not conscious to them. And this happens, surprisingly, even in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. A person can be so busy fulfilling the mitzvah and forget about the God who gave him the mitzvah and for what purpose he is doing that. In a sense, the more religious a person might be, the more common this pitfall will be. In fact, the joke is told that an older fellow, a great scholar, spent his life in the study of Torah, fulfillment of the mitzvahs, and they come, someone comes and says, "Do you believe in God?" He says, "Absolutely." Will you swear that there is a God? Absolutely. He said, no. I mean, when you swear, take the Torah scroll out of the ark, hold that in your hands and swear, which in the Torah, that's the most severe thing you can do. And you don't even do that. You try to avoid doing that even when it's the truth. So will you take the Torah scroll and give your word that there is a God? And he says, 1 second, that's a really severe thing to do. Obviously not realizing that, well, if there wouldn't be a God, what would it all matter? It's called getting caught up in the details. Now, jokes aside, there's actually a story of a great scholar who later became a committed Hasidic Jew, and what caused him to really advance to that kind of understanding of Hasidic teachings and what he was missing was an encounter that he had, or supposedly had, because the story is a bit incredible, with some Hasidic Jews who were already studying the Torah in that way. They spent Yom Kippur together, or maybe more time. And, Yom Kippur, you're pretty much praying all day, and there's a break, typically, at some point of the prayer. And during this break, they went back to the hotel or whatever it was. This non-Hasidic studied the Torah all the time and was not, why do we have that? I don't know. Was not, that's why. It didn't have the mindset of Hasidic teachings which say a deeper sense of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And they'll come back to the hotel. And this scholar is shocked to find the table set and a beautiful lunch as if it was a Shabbat or another holiday set out. And it's Yom Kippur, we don't eat lunch today. And what's going on? He's like, maybe some people have a custom that they set the table. They usually just put a tablecloth on the table because just to mark the day, even though there's not going to be any dinner,